Coming up on this episode of Common Denominator.
So if we can have instant access to, an artificially created realm that is immersive, that, fools our senses into feeling that it's real, yes, it has a possibility for addiction.
Hi, and welcome to Common Denominator. Straight up conversations with me, Moshe Popack. This week's guest is Dr. Susan Schneider, whose credentials include the NASA Chair and a Distinguished Scholar for the Library of Congress, the Founding Director for the Center for the Future Mind at Florida Atlantic University, and the author of Artificial You, AI and the Future of the Mind. We'll chat about artificial intelligence, the impact of technology on society, and answer the burning question, what the heck is the Metaverse and why you should care? Dr. Schneider, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So we're hearing all the time now about the term Metaverse. Maybe you can help us a little bit about dissect the concept about the Metaverse, kind of what it is and what your thoughts about that is.
Well, the Metaverse is in its early incarnation now, but the idea is, yes, a way to sort of check out from the real world, so to speak. I mean, we should talk about what the real world really is, but utilize augmented reality and virtual reality, especially through, say, glasses. So some of your listeners might be familiar with the Oculus system, for example. They may have children who are playing on VR. So the idea is that suppose you have yet another mind-numbing Zoom call at work, okay? And instead of interacting with your colleagues on Zoom and looking at these little boxes on the screen, you can opt to be in a fully immersive experience. So as the technology gets better and better, it will be like you and I here. You'll actually think you're in a room. And the beauty of it is you could be able to avoid commuting. If you want to see your family and you're, say, on a business trip, you can see them. But the challenge of it is, of course, well, it's many-faceted, I'll just say that. But, I mean, that's the general idea.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, right. So it seems to me, I mean, this is just something as a layperson, and I know before the show we talked a little bit about this, that I have this like theory, something called like metaphysical, right? So it's everything starts the way I see it from our thought and our spirit. So if in this world we're not happy, for example, so what we do is we can create this metaverse, this other world, while not necessarily dealing with the physical world, which is, there's good days and tough days, right? So we just want to check out, and it could become more and more, I guess, addictive.
Absolutely. So, we already see that in our society with, say, teenagers or even adults who are addicted to video games or people who are addicted to just being online all the time. And I think it will be even more so the case if the metaverse really gets vivid. So if we can have instant access to, an artificially created realm that is immersive, that, fools our senses into feeling that it's real, yes, it has a possibility for addiction. It also could be freeing for some people. Right. I mean, I like to not just be dystopian, but think of the human possibilities. So, one example would be, the opportunity to spend time with the family, or say you're stuck at an airport and you have like a 5-hour layover. And so instead you decide to have a little virtual trip, to do something incredibly exciting, like, walk around Florence, so in a way it will give us a kind of sense of freedom over an unwanted schedule or, an unwanted life. But yes, that's bad in the sense that when people go overboard, just as they are now, they may not necessarily learn to cope with reality.
And I notice I'm seeing in the news over $1 million purchases, right, of virtual real estate. And I'm trying to figure that out because, right, right, it's Does that make any sense to you? Meaning actual U.S. dollars or crypto, whatever they're using to purchase virtual real estate in the virtual world. Does that make any sense?
I mean, as with real estate, one worries about bubbles. And I think in this case, it's a lot more possible that it could be a bubble. I mean, in the case of, buying real estate, which I think actually isn't that your business? Your real estate.
That is my business.
I mean, you have to worry about tangible things. Right.
So that's why I'm thinking about that.
Think about the real estate market. I mean, there are usually people who want to be in the hot places. I mean, who wants to actually physically live in a VR space that's not even very good yet. So the tech's not there yet. And I think that might be one of the problems that Facebook is facing. I mean, if you try to get into, a multiverse right now, you're not going to find it exactly a seamless experience.
Right. And I see you mentioned about Facebook. Recently I saw it was for 2021, they spent $10 billion on research and development in the metaverse. Their market cap dropped by several $100 billion. I guess investors were like, oh, okay, this is probably many years away. And I think Mark Zuckerberg said, we probably have like 10 years, maybe 15 years till that actually happens. So you're thinking these people are buying this real estate and it's probably, just to kind of bank, land bank or virtual land bank the properties. But one thing that did make sense is that they're buying on places that are virtually well-traveled. So I think about advertising, right? So they're able to advertise the different brands now. Maybe it was Nike, Adidas, I didn't see who it was, but they're buying ad space on virtual real estate. That kind of concept I can understand a little bit.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I just don't know how many of these platforms will actually be around. So like when you're buying Miami real estate, at least what street will still physically be present later. Well,
Right.
barring worries about, global warming and whatnot. But I mean, with these VR platforms, they come and go. So I guess good for Nike if they want to invest the money, right? But I wouldn't invest it.
Right. Because I know, are there also, as far as platforms, there are also different metaverses, right?
That's right.
Right. So it's not established who is going to be the metaverse as far as where everybody ends up going. I remember, what was it? Before Facebook, there were other social media platforms that don't exist anymore, right? So you don't know who's going to end up being, right, the one that sticks around.
And that worries me because just as Facebook sort of bought a lot of these cool startups and made the face of social media something that is perhaps not the best for human flourishing, so too that could happen with the metaverse itself. So it could be that there'll be something like what we call a multiverse, full of different metaverses,
Right.
and you can go from one space to the next. But if you look at the history of what's happened with the large tech companies, it hasn't really played out like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've seen that. And obviously what's been in all the news is NFTs as well. So maybe a little, again, for the layperson, a little understanding of what an NFT is.
So an NFT is like a digital object that you purchase. An example would be, well, you'll have an avatar. Some of the listeners may be familiar with that already from playing Oculus or going on a sort of metaverse called Second Life, which has actually been around for a while. But it's like a sort of virtual you. So you'll have an avatar, and it may or may not even be like you in the real world. You may want something entirely different. But you might want to buy it things.
Right.
So people are actually spending money on clothing for their avatars
Right.
and artwork.
My kids are showing me that, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where you get into these NFTs.
Yeah, and I was reading recently that the digital NFT art world value has gone higher than the actual physical art.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it must be great for the people involved. And, if you think of the art market itself, there's so much of this sort of shishi nature to purchasing a so-and-so, a piece by so-and-so. So the market itself is already like that. And now it's just gone into the world of, digital art.
Yeah, it's really, so I guess we'll see how that develops. But I just want to go to really social media in general, because that's how eventually, obviously, the metaverse evolved. But what's your take on the current status of social media? Your thoughts on it?
Oh boy. So I'm not extremely thrilled with it personally. And I think Facebook is a prime example.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll just, contrast a few things we can do on Facebook. One is stay connected to friends and family members who may be far away. I mean, for example, I have a sister who posts constantly pictures of, where she is, and I read it to kind of find out what she's doing in California. But on the other hand, think about, for example, the amplification of social disharmony and the bubbles that people can live in. So as soon as somebody already has a view, the social media algorithms strengthen the view and make the people more and more extreme, which isn't the best thing in the world. And on top of that, people are becoming confused about what the truth is or whether there's even truth. So you can always find something on the internet that validates your position. And it often can go straight in the direction of something that makes you even more of an extremist than you already are, unfortunately. And there's not even an agreement about where to go for fact-checking.
Right.
So I think things have really changed. And we've seen that especially over the last 4 years, with a lot of polarization. I see that in Washington, too. And I think social media is just making it worse and worse.
Yeah, one thing is I always just think about the human. What did it used to be before kind of the cell phone and social media, internet? But now we're seeing, it seems like the muscle memory, average 4-6 hours a day of people, of the most valuable asset, their time. They're sitting on their phone instead of being physically here. And that's why, again, the metaverse might, add to that, taking away of human to human connection. I'm a big believer of collective consciousness. And the more we connect as humans, in reality, the better society is going to be. So the more we're kind of in our own little bubble with, again, not knowing what fact is, not validation of feelings wrongly, and, hours every day, and it's getting more and more. You go to any restaurant, right? You could see a couple or people, they're sitting, instead of having the conversation, they're on the phone sitting together. The kids what's their play date? Their play date is video games, watching each other play video games. It's a little bit out there.
It is, and I see that at home.
Right. Yeah. No.
Yeah,
I know this is an issue that we all have. Yeah.
Definitely, and I think part of it too was inspired by the pandemic, where I have teenagers, and they really couldn't have in-person connections, and it makes me wonder how they will evolve as people, and all around us, if all we're doing is worrying about the like button, and how many likes we're getting, and how we look on social media, how are we really cultivating true human connection?
Yeah.
And, we have to really think about how this technology is to be used for the betterment of society, as opposed to that it should be used. I mean, not just because we have the technology, just because we have these platforms, it doesn't mean that we should all just cultivate the self in such a way. And, I worry about that a lot as a philosophy professor. The cultivation of, future humans, and, how we should raise our children, and what it is to be a self or a person.
That's amazing. I know, in that way, you talk about polarization. I know you do a lot of work with Congress and NASA. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So with Congress, I have a bipartisan role, and I advise on a lot of issues involving technology, ranging from cybersecurity, which you can imagine
Yeah.
keeps me busy, to algorithmic discrimination, to the Metaverse. I present to Congress sometimes at the Capitol building, other times at the Library of Congress. And then I sort of informally discuss the issues with members when they contact me.
So you work on both sides of the aisle. Today I think about that. I'm like, is that possible? I'm thinking, and it's probably a little more challenging than it was a couple of years ago.
It got worse after the recent events in Washington at the Capitol, and I was disappointed. I have an office there, right actually across from the Capitol, right next to the Supreme Court at the Library of Congress. And as soon as the pandemic hit, I was not able to go in for 7 months or a year almost. My first time back in Washington was actually after the Capitol violence.
Right.
And the difference was like night and day. So having, a meal with members of Congress, from opposite sides of the aisle, I will see them actually, just making faces when the other party talks. And I never saw that lack of civility before.
Yeah.
It's really, all we can do is just hope for the best, and hope for new people, young people,
Right.
To join up.
It's funny. I'm just saying. And by the way, I just experienced that today. Went to a PTA meeting, parents, the board, principal of school, and you talk about 93% of communication is tone and body language, and you see arms crossed, you see the pitch of people, and all I did is I got up, I said, okay, we can do this forever. Okay, you don't trust this one, you don't trust that one. I'm like, what are we doing? Where are we going? Okay, let's yell. Fine, let's yell till we're blue in the face. That's fine. Everybody doesn't want to agree. If I would love in this world, what we need is to figure out how to agree to disagree. I don't know where that went sideways, because as humans, as I always say, we actually have probably 97% of who we are is similar. It's that 3% of let's knock that other person. So it's interesting that you're experiencing that, obviously, in Congress.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we need to remember what we have in common. And I think in the tech domain, there's so much that we should have in common. Yeah. That's the funny thing. I mean, one thing I talk to Congress about a lot is the future of work, the future of employment, for example. Right. And so, as AI progresses, increasingly, humans are actually getting outmoded in their professions. So consider radiology, consider computer programming itself. And eventually it may be the case that we really should all come together and think about the human future. What is the future of work, and will we have jobs? And if not, how do we want to live? How do we want to subsidize people? And what's the appropriate response to that?
Well, I see it's nearing. They're saying within this year, our unemployment's going to go close to 3%. But I guess in the long term, it may not. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
So since COVID, we've seen, how many shortages there are for, ranging from supermarket workers to construction workers, right? I mean, it's really unbelievable. And in a way, we don't even fully understand what's going on. But the idea here is that according to some influential studies, over the next 30 years, we will see robotics and artificial intelligence outmode us in nearly every respect. And it won't just be automotive factory workers, for example, or bank tellers. It will be doctors, lawyers, professors. And so I think it's important that we start talking across the aisle about the future of work, among other things. I mean, there are all sorts of other topics that I think should unite us as well. And so what I try to do in Washington is focus on, not getting caught up in, negativity, which,
Right.
Admittedly can be difficult when, you think about what's happened over the last several years. But,
Right.
I mean, we have to push forward.
Right. My grandfather used to say, as long as both sides are reasonably unhappy, you're at a good place. Right.
Right.
It's like try to make it work. But I know you also wrote a book, Artificial You, AI, and the Future of the Mind. What are, in your perspective, what are a few major key points that you'd like to tell the audience about?
Sure. So I talked about whether the machines that may outthink us could be conscious beings, whether it would feel like anything to be them. And I took a sort of middle-of-the-road approach to that. And to connect things back up with the metaverse, I was thinking about how we might augment our intelligence to connect us to the internet. So I was thinking about ongoing research projects like Elon Musk's Neuralink, for
Right.
example, and other companies as well, and how there's an increasing drive to connect humans to the internet, not just through the phones, but through wearable technology, including technology that can detect states of the brain.
Right.
And I was thinking about what it means for society and also for the nature of the self, and whether sort of to push it as far into the future as possible, because I'm a futurist and I like to think where it's all headed. I was wondering, could we augment our brain in really radical ways? So, for example, could you go to a Center for Mind Design and get a set of microchips that replaces various parts of the brain
Right.
and sort of walk out with all kinds of new abilities? Like, all of a sudden you have a revamped memory. All of a sudden you've uploaded multiple vacations that you never had. Think, what was that film? Total Recall.
Totally close. Yeah.
Maybe
that's
you decide to delete certain memories of relationships, like what was that, Eternal Sunshine? I mean, you could see that science fiction here is very suggestive. So I was thinking about
interesting.
the implications for all this, as this technology moves forward. And of course, a lot of this would happen in a VR setting, So, I mean, it dovetails nicely with the kind of discussions of the metaverse.
Well, you've gotten me thinking about, it would be an amazing thing for humans. The way I see it, kind of obstacles. If we can get rid of guilt, fear, shame, and trauma. So to your point, what you were making, right? If we could, because I was thinking, I'm like, I'm kind of negative to the idea to implant things into the brain. I'm like, but you're getting me thinking on the benefits of that. So really, because I think of this world comes down to action and results, right? Getting things done. And I think that there's negative programming. Imagine we could program positive programming. So I'm like, oh, wow, that would be a pretty cool thing.
Yeah,
Right.
thinking about AI technology for the human good is
Right.
so important. And
Yeah, man.
the way that the very same technology, which could create a sort of science fiction dystopia, could also benefit people who are currently disabled, right? So an example would be there's a brain chip right now that's actually in phase 2 clinical trials to help people with radical memory loss. The scientist's name is Ted Berger, and it's an artificial hippocampus. And he's been working on this for 15 years. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And who would, not want somebody who has, terrible memory loss to not benefit from that technology? That same technology, though, if it's used to, say, amplify the memory ability of our kids who are about to go to college,
Right.
say, so that they could keep up with all the other kids with brain chips, is a potential dystopia. And so that's why context is so important in discussing the uses of these technologies, because in a way, the technologies themselves aren't intrinsically bad or good. It's the use that we humans put them to. And that's why discussions like this are so important, because the proper use of these technologies shouldn't be limited to the boardroom of Facebook, where, it's decided how to deploy, these next-gen chips, or in the case of Facebook, they have a wristband right now that detects states of the brain that they're about to unroll with Oculus.
Right.
We have to ask, what do we want, and what are the implications? So
I think that in most things in society, I think, to your point, everything just is, and then it's who are the humans that are in control, and do they have good intention, clean intention, or do they have negative intention? And that's a tough journey. But the conversation is the beginning of that journey. So
it
I agree
is.
with that.
And, I like to think about how humble we are as a species. I mean, I find myself sometimes reading about the Manhattan Project, because there you can see a combination of, well-meaning people, or people who just lost sight of where it's all headed, as well as perhaps some people who really wanted to hurt others, right? And I think the same thing goes on with technological innovations in general. That, people just they get so caught up in the development that they don't necessarily think about where it's all headed.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know also you're at the Center for the Future Mind at Florida Atlantic University. What are the top kind of 2 or 3 things that you're kind of spearheading? Because you're a founding member over there.
Yeah. So I came to FAU about a year ago and founded this new center that works on precisely the kind of things we just talked about. Mm-hmm. So we're working on the future of the Metaverse. We're working on the future of intelligent systems, whether humans could augment their intelligence and whether they should, whether AI could outthink us, how we should translate our views into concrete policy for reporters, to consume, for people to understand, and how we also should translate it in congressional domains. So the idea isn't just to sit in the ivory tower, it's to engage with the public in ways that we hope will make the world a better place.
That's really amazing. I want to first of all say thank you so much, Susan. And how could the listeners find out more about you? How can they get your book?
Oh, they could just pick it up at Amazon.
Cool. That's an easy
Virtually.
way. Virtually, right.
And they can go to my center website, which is the Center for the Future Mind at Florida Atlantic University.
Well, thank you so much, Susan.
Thanks for having me. That was really fun.
Yes, definitely, always.
Thanks for listening to the Common Denominator podcast. Join us next week for another inspiring, impactful, and empowering conversation. To learn more about Moshe, head to MoshePopack.com. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it. And we'd be grateful if you could rate, review, and subscribe to the show.